County Pension Fund Annual Meeting 2018. This is very much your meeting. I'm Councillor Tom Biggins, I'm Chair of the Pensions Committee. But just before we begin, there are a couple of housekeeping rules that I must just tell you about. Firstly, there isn't a scheduled fire alarm practice, so if the fire alarm does go off, please exit the chamber through the designated fire exits. And there are members of the pensions team about who will help facilitate this. And secondly, I'd be most grateful if you could please just check that your mobile phones are turned off, please. We have a very interesting series of presentations that I hope very much that you will enjoy. And to start off the process, we will hear from Debbie Sharp, the Pensions Administration Manager, who will provide an administration update on the work of the pensions team over the last 12 months and general administration issues affecting the LGPS. Secondly, we have a presentation from Tony Maximchuk and Tim Radford that are seated at the end of the platform. They're from a fund management company called Securis, who has recently been appointed as one of the Shropshire Pension Fund managers. They will be providing an overview on insurance-linked securities, which is very much a new asset class that the fund has just started to invest in. Then you will hear from John Burns, who's sitting next to Debbie. John is the Chief Operating and Financial Officer at LGPS Central. And John will provide an update on LGPS Central now that it is up and running. And John will also provide a recap on the benefits of pooling for the Shropshire Fund. Then to close, we have Michael Marshall, who's sitting next to John, who is the Director of Responsible Investment and Engagement at LGPS Central, who will provide an update on responsible investment and the whole ethos of investing, of the investment process. As usual, we don't have individual copies of the slides, but some large print copies are available on request. The meeting is also being filmed, there's a camera over there, and will be available on the website. We very much welcome the opportunity for you to ask questions, and this will take place this year slightly differently to last, because we'll be taking questions after each presentation, and I will chair that question and answer session. There are also members of the pension team here, so if anybody has got any individual questions that they would like to have a one-to-one chat about, please do come forward at the end of the meeting, and the pensions team will do their best to accommodate you. This year's annual report is on the pensions website, and it is well worth having a look. It provides great detail about the asset allocation of the fund, and also most importantly the performance of the fund over the last 12 months. We also have with us James Walton and Justin Bridges, and we also have various members of the Pensions Committee and the Pensions Board as well today. The timing's about 11:05. Hopefully the meeting will go on for about 2 hours, and it's my intention to try and aim for a 1 o'clock closure. So without further ado, I will now hand over to Debbie Sharp.
Thank you for the introduction, Councillor Biggins. Our first presenter this year after the chair. That's quite a nice position for me to be in. They usually tag me on at the end, so you've got me to chat through what I've been doing and what my team have been doing. From the introduction, yes, I'm Debbie Sharp and I look after the Pensions Administration team. So as a quick background, we collect all of the money in that then these gentlemen can invest for us, and then we look after all of the records and pay out the benefits. So we're dealing with all of the day-to-day business of actually looking after your money for you and hopefully getting you a nice accurate benefit paid on time at the end of the day. So, I've got a quarter of an hour just to have a chat with you and an update of what we've been doing. Each year I sort of think, can I stand up and tell you anything new? Is it just the same? It's just pensions administration. But yes, again, we just keep having change after change, and we've got to keep up with that change. So over the last year or so, we're just touched on, you'll see the theme here, more of everything. We've had more regulation changes still, more data checks we have to do. We've got quite a few projects on the go this year of looking at acronyms here. GMP recommendation, what is it? If you've been in the local government pension scheme, you will have historically paid a bit less national insurance, so we have a tie-in with the state pension. That's all what the guaranteed minimum pension check is all about. Because of the introduction of the state second pension, we've actually got to ensure that everybody's records across the whole of the country are correct with the HMRC. Not an easy thing to do because HMRC haven't always kept good records, haven't always had computer systems, have changed computer systems the same as all of us. So we've got a big exercise there because they are no longer going to be giving out of this data. They're doing it once only now. And with anything else that's government related, if they say that's what they're going to do, they will, and they will not backtrack on it. So this is a big exercise for all pension companies. Data quality, big push on data quality from the pensions regulator. And iConnect is a little word just popped in there. This is a service that we're employing that collects the data from our employers. So lots of things with data that we're trying to do to ensure our data is as good as we can possibly get it. So that in turn just means that we've got to have more training for our employers. It's more complicated now than being in the local government pension scheme for employers as well. They've got a lot more they need to actually tell us about. My Pension Online is actually the system that you can go into and have a look at your benefits online, have a look at your own benefits as well as using the website for information. We're looking at upgrading that. We have to keep ensuring it stays up to date with all of the technology out there for everybody on a smartphone now or a tablet. We've got to make sure that you can actually access the information when you want to access it. And we've also taken the payroll in-house. We now pay it through our pensions administration team, and my team look after that as well. That just successfully, went live in October. So going forward now, we've got everything in one place. There we are, a nice young man that was born just down the road. We do have to keep changing. We do have to keep evolving. We can't just stay still. And I've got some statistics here that sort of show you that even just in the last 15 years, I've been around a lot longer than that, but even in the last 15 years, going back to 2003, we had 300 people who used our pensions online service. We just launched it in 2003. So it's not bad. We've got 300 people to actually go, yeah, I'll use a website. We've now got just under 9,500 people that have signed up. So it's still an uphill battle, but our statistics of our users actually are one of the best in the country for an online pension site. So we are engaging our members. We just need to make sure people continue doing it. Doesn't work for everybody. There are still paper things around. We will still have people dropping in. That doesn't change. But people want it changing. People want to be able to do things at 10 o'clock at night. Not quite sure why, but if you want to look at your pension, you can do. That's an increase of over 3,000% in that 15 years. We had 67 employers in 2003. We've now got 134. That has increased by 100% over the same time. And strangely, which you wouldn't have thought it would actually equate the same, but the membership has also doubled in that time. Well, we've gone up by 100%. So we've gone now, we're just under 50,000 members across our actives, our deferred members and our pensioners. So we've got 50,000 records that we're actually looking after. We had, and always had historically, one scheme. Now we have a 3-in-1 scheme. There's lots of legislation that's being carried forward, so people have different types of benefit in the one scheme still, but we're looking after 3 schemes in one. In 2003, we still had paper files for everybody. We had a paper record, and if we couldn't find your paper record, you can imagine what that did in the office. Of down tools, we needed to find it. So we've now got all of the records on electronic servers. We've got all of the documents that are in one place, so that does actually save us time and actually keeps it more secure for you. It can't get, or hopefully can't get lost. We used to collect data just once a year. That was a big exercise with our employers. We're now collecting their data electronically through the ether, and it comes straight into our system each month. That's a big change, and we've got all of our employers doing that. So for any employers in the room, just want to thank them for actually engaging with us and getting this up and running. So adapting to our members, we've got to give them access to the information in different ways. Not everybody can make it into the Shire Hall to see us, not everybody wants to. So we've got to find ways of explaining their pensions options to them in all of the formats that work for everybody and their working patterns nowadays. It's a lot more complicated to run calculations for them. People can do that online themselves on their records if they want to, so they can find out a bit of information before coming to us. But the information we're giving out, as I've already used a couple of acronyms, it's not always plain, it's not always as simple as it should be, but we're trying harder. So we're now also working with the Plain English campaign to make sure that documents that we're putting out cover the information they need to for you, but in a way that actually you can read it. With our employers, we introduced systems that we hope to get that information more accurately. We can no longer just get it right in the end. If we used to have a member who was with us for 40 years, what we had to make sure was, have we got the start date right? Were they full-time? What's their end date? And what have you paid them in the last year? That's no longer good enough. We need to know exactly what they earn each year in, year out, and we have to be increasing those as well. So we need to make sure that we're getting the message to our employees to check what we're giving them. So there's more employees guidance on the website. We try and give them more training, so just to make sure that everything we're getting is right. If it isn't right, we're collecting contributions on a monthly basis. There's statutory requirements of when that money needs to be with us. We now also have regulatory oversight that if that's wrong, comes in even a day late, that's actually a breach in regulations, and we now have to formally record breaches, and if we think they are of material significance to the pensions regulator, we have to actually report ourselves, our employers, our committee, if we don't think they're making good decisions, to the regulator. So he actually has regulatory oversight over some statutory bodies now, which includes us. But what it does do for us, by having to put this in place nowadays, we have got a way of capturing if we've got an issue with an employer, because if they breach several times over the year, we can start seeing that there might be a pattern for a bit of an extra training need or engagement with that employer. So it works for us and it works for the employer as well. Just creates us more work. Our governance was enhanced. Remember, so in the Public Service Pensions Act that was introduced a couple of years ago now, or 5 years ago, where does the time go to? We had a pension board introduced. Councillor Biggins has already mentioned, we thankfully, thank you for attending, we've got pension board members in the audience today. We've also got pensions committee members, but the pensions committee has been around a very long time in Shropshire, but we've now got a pensions board too that actually has oversight and has quite an onus on them to ensure that we're doing the job properly. So they have to assist the pensions manager in ensuring, and that's our pensions scheme manager, which is James, not just me, to make sure that they think that we're doing what we should be doing properly. And you'll see there in the little picture that exactly what's feeding in to actually look at the pensions fund nowadays. We just used to be able to sit quietly, get on, do the best job we could do, but we've got a lot of people now that are keeping an eye on ensuring that these benefits are accurate correctly and the money is being invested where it should be. A lot of government interest nowadays as well, which LGPS Central, it's affecting everything in LGPS sort of environment really, as well as admin. It now impacts more on investment. We've recently had the pensions regulator in to support some employer training we did. It wasn't the regulator, it was one of his education team, but they're all classes almost, you have the pensions regulator in. And their focus at the moment is very much on record keeping, data quality. They are doing a big trawl across LGPS at the moment. There's 11 funds across the whole of the country that have been targeted for a deep dive. Thankfully, Shropshire was not one of those, so we take that as a positive. They obviously haven't got us on their radar yet. They're looking at monthly data collection. When the regulator came in, he had a big focus on he wanted funds. They should be getting their data monthly. Also should be ensuring that we're protecting our members from scams. You've seen the advertising recently on the television and the newspapers. There's a big push by the government to try and stop people being scammed out of their retirement pension. So we have everything in place that we can try and protect people, that if we think they're doing something that doesn't look in their best interest to us, we can't always stop them doing it, but we can ensure they've had everything possible that points them in the right direction to make sure they've got every bit of information to know that that decision is correct. We now have to actually data score, so as well as collecting all of this data for this 50,000 records that we've got, and we're not the biggest funds by any means, being a county fund, but we have to score that data, so we've now got to put things in place to try and, as well as say that we have a data in a record in the right place, actually is it correct as well? So we've got to actually look for missing data and then actually say, is the quality good as well? And we have to report back now to the pensions regulator in an annual report of exactly what our data scores are. So that's new this year. And good for the team, and I do wish to just put on record, I've got a lot of my team here today to help out if anybody wants to ask any questions directly on a one-to-one basis afterwards, just to thank them for their support. We couldn't do everything we do and get through it without having such a solid team behind me. So thank you to all of them for supporting us all. But TPR said we're on the right track. Record keeping's looking good, we're doing monthly data collection, and we have everything else in place. So he came and had a chat with us afterwards, and we just sort of used his time to ensure whether there was anything we were missing. And we had some really nice feedback, so for me that was really good to hear. We've had regulation changes, yet again, more changes. There was changes in January to do around partner pensions, clarification in regulations with that. In May, we had the general data protection, so data protection was ramped up, and you'll hear a lot about GDPR, so we've had to ensure that we're compliant with that. Regulations for our law changed, which was a lot to do with people leaving employment after age 55 can now actually take their benefits without having to get an employer's consent. It might be reduced because of early payment, but the regulations aren't quite right that not all of the groups of employees can do that, so they're trying to tighten up and make sure that everybody has the same options. And that's just giving a bit more flexibility. Not everybody wants to wait till 65 to get their pension. They need to have the options to take it earlier. In September, we've got different draft regulations coming around employer cost cap and valuation. I'll touch on that just a bit in a minute. And then in October, of course, you just had the budget. You might just think that just affects how much tax we pay on our wine or our beer, but actually there was things that were mentioned in there that have actually affected our pension scheme. They changed what they call as the scape rate, and this rate that they've dictated a change to means we have to change lots of factors in how we calculate things. So even the budget can actually affect how we do calculations. Still lots of things on the go as well. Exit payment reform, fair deal. There's some things that are still not gone away, so we're just waiting for those. I'll just do it just 1 minute on this. The cost cap process for the LGPS, we are looked at by 2 different bodies to actually say what should the contribution rates be for employers, how costly is the scheme as a whole. But there's 2 processes across the local government pension scheme. We've got the Scheme Advisory Board, which was set up in the Pensions Act a few years ago, but we've also got a Treasury process, and they've both got a process of calculating what they think the cost of the scheme is going forward. And at the moment, they're both coming up with a different figure. So they need to be looking and talking together, and there is a gentleman's agreement that says they will work together. The moment the Scheme Advisory Board seems to be saying against Treasury, Treasury seems to think the scheme is coming out less costly to employers, but the Scheme Advisory Board is saying yes, but there were some assumptions made that haven't come out to fruition, so not enough people have possibly gone into the 50-50 scheme, which is just something that's on offer nowadays to members. You can pay a bit less, but still stay in the pension scheme. And not as many people perhaps take as big a lump sum as have been reckoned on. So there's some changes here that they really need to bottom out. So we've got to have a look at what actually is going to change. It could mean employer contributions go up. It could mean benefits change for members. It can go both ways, so we're watching what that's doing to it. The other thing that we're also watching out at the moment, that there was a statement that scheme valuation, so that's the LGPS as a whole with the government, would be changing to every 4 years, whereas at the moment you'll know from if you attend these meetings, we have a triennial valuation, so that's every 3 years. So it's looking, does our local exercise also have to change as well? So we're watching this space. And as you say, pick up on the Darwin theme there, we do have to keep changing, we have to keep evolving to make sure our systems are in place, training's in place, that we've got everything that we need to ensure that we're ticking all the right boxes for everybody. And the main people we need to tick the boxes for are yourselves. We've got to get your benefit right.
Any questions for Debbie?
No, stunned into silence.
Okay. Thank you, Debbie, very much.
It's going to start with good morning, but it's just good afternoon now, and so I'll kick off with my name is John Burns. I'm Chief Operating and Financial Officer at LGPS Central. This is the pooling company, the operator of an investment vehicle that is moving ahead to manage the investments of the Shropshire County Pension Fund over the next few years. I know a number of you would have been here last year, but what I'd like to do, first of all, is just to recap on where we've got to, or where we're heading with the pooling initiative. A number of years ago, the government established a process or a policy of pooling local government pension funds. Throughout the country, there are around 91 different independent pools, covering around about 220–230 million pounds worth of assets. The initiative was to pool those assets into a number of discrete operator pools. So you've got on the picture here, you've got 8 operators who have been set up in England and Wales, of which LGPS Central Limited is one of them. The idea is behind that is to develop a large pool of assets within these discrete units, which can invest in multiple different disciplines of asset classes, such as equities, such as fixed income, such as alternatives, and the rest, giving a much greater opportunity to provide aggregated returns, to offer benefits of better transparency to the funds, and also much, in particular, better returns for investors, and also to drive down the costs of those third-party investment managers. Your pool operator is LGPS Central. We are one of, the Shropshire County Pension Fund is one of 9 investors in that pool. You can see, if you've got good geography, the red diagram, the red picture in the middle there, the coloured shapes there, they are the counties within our area. We're a private company managing the assets on your behalf, and the pension funds who are investing in us, the operator, are investing or have bought into the company on an equally weighted basis. We currently have the opportunity to invest on behalf of the regions around 40 billion of assets, which is currently held amongst those investors. We are based in Wolverhampton, and we have around 47 staff currently in the business. In terms of what the aim of the pooling initiative is about, you can see here, briefly mentioned some of them, but we're a scale operator. We will have 40 billion of assets under management. It produces possibly better investment opportunities because we've got greater greater critical mass to invest. It gives us a very strong negotiating position, enables us to drive down the fees which investment managers are charging. It establishes a really strong governance framework around the organisation. We're a regulated FCA entity, so we've got the structure of governance around what we need to, how we need to offer our services. We will be able to offer that value for money. We have different cost structures to private investment managers, so we're able to return the benefits of that cost structure through to our funds and eventually through to the pension funds themselves. And one of the main initiatives that the government had was around that increased opportunity to invest in infrastructure, to try and use the collective value of the pension schemes in the UK to be able to invest in railways, bridges, roads, etc. Notwithstanding those decisions will be made on an investment decision basis as opposed to a political direction. So essentially, to recap, there are government expectations around delivering pooling and the benefits that will achieve. In terms of the financial outcome of the pooling initiative, you can see here that over the life of the plan that's been adopted, 16 years, we're looking at around £250 million worth of savings that we can provide back to the investors in the fund, in the operator. And of that, we've estimated that over that 16 years, around £36 million is the savings benefit that we can expect for Shropshire's assets if they are invested in the pool with us. So that's money that goes straight back into the fund, enables it to continue to pay benefits to its members, and also, quite importantly, it will also reduce the likelihood of deficits that may occur on the fund, which would then be easily funded by local authorities. Just to make it clear, there's no impact in what we're doing in terms of members. The administration, as Deborah mentioned, that stays with the Shropshire County Fund, and we are just looking after the management of those assets. It's also fair to say that the asset allocation that the pension committee are involved in, the pension board AC, that is all done also independently. So they will decide that they will invest in Securus and others. We will be part of the we manage the assets as they see fit. Very important, just with further this again. So just you've got the 36 million savings I was mentioning. Great advantage of what we're doing is we're also driving down the opening of the transparency of fund managers. We're part of the Scheme Advisory Board Transparency Programme. The assets that we have under management on behalf of our partner funds, it's critical that we are operating to their own vision of actually getting transparency of costs. You will be familiar with the debates around the full transparency of the costs within pension funds, not just the manager's fees, but lots of other added additional costs there. Scale advantages we covered. One of the big advantages that we can offer is that we will be looking to bring in-house a lot of the management of assets and see them move on just areas where we can offer those. We will, of course, use third-party managers where that's appropriate, but we will try and use internal ability, capability if we can. Just a reminder there, it is an organisation that's there for the long-term future, and it's an organisation as an operator which Shropshire County Fund is a shareholder in and has influence over it, so there is control, there is oversight, and there is structure behind it. Governance structure, just to briefly touch on this. Again, I think Debbie brought out in her piece just how the world is changing and how we need to have in place appropriate governance, oversight and transparency in how we operate. And you can see here the complex structure that we have in place. Top line green elements are the external oversight that we have over our organisation. Pension committees and the administrating authority feature very heavily there. Then coming down into the second layer, the shareholder forum, as you expect, you have a shareholder governance group looking after shareholder matters, things like take on approvals for subsidiaries we need to preemptive with investing in a new vehicle, sort of growing the corporate governance aspects. And then we have the joint committee, which is a committee again of shareholder representatives looking after the client issues. Within the organisation, you can see the standard structure that one would expect with a board, a non-executive team of three very professional non-executives who we're very lucky to have experience there in pension funds and also in private sector asset management. And then the structure beneath that, perhaps what you normally expect to see, internal governance arrangements with risk committees, with investment committees, and additional board committees to support the work that the board does. All there to ensure there's sufficient governance, oversight, and accountability. If we look briefly at just how we've got to where we are, it's quite amazing actually that in April last year we started the business. We're looking now to take on over time up to 40 billion of assets from our partner funds. And you look back and I can see Secure started in 2005 and they've got 6 billion under management. Look back at some of the other larger private companies, Schroders or BlackRock, who have been going for hundreds of years and they've got more assets than we have. But just they have the same sort of oversight structure, governance that they adopt is what we have to adopt as well. And putting this in place, as I think you see, has been a tremendous achievement for the operator, the people involved, to be able to get us to this place. Just highlight a couple of things. There's an acronym in the first station, stop the ACS. Alternative Contractual Scheme. This is the vehicle that's been developed by the UK as a tax transparent vehicle. It gives us the most efficient tax breaks globally. There are other vehicles around. There's a Dublin version, an Irish version, there's a Luxembourg version, but the UK version does have the best rates of tax arrangements with the most jurisdictions. So over time that will be a very efficient, tax-efficient investment vehicle. If you look further along to the fourth dot there, my colleague Michael will be covering some of the responsible investment parts, but we did sign up to the local OGS signed the transparency code. This is our commitment to be transparent, to operate as a transparent operator. On the second row, the report received from their MHCLG, this is the government body that oversees the pooling strategy. They have required regular report from us. They've been very complimentary on how we've developed to date, the assets we have under management, the relationships we have with our pension partners, and are pleased that we're making good progress on the initiative. We move to the final dots there. I'd just like to point out we did appoint our first external global equity fund managers recently. Great success there. Has actually proved and vindicated that we can run the fund in the way that our partner funds want us to do and obtain very good competitive rates from fund managers, such that will give us a significant return to our investment partners by investing with us. If I put that in numbers, you'll see that, you remember from one of the earlier slides, the total savings that is expected from our pool over the 7 years is £250 million. We've been able to achieve rates with this particular fund, with the fund managers, which will increase those savings by £50 million. So the percentage of shops you would get from that by investing with us at 36 million goes up proportionately. So the success of which the pool can deliver the savings has been vindicated by our own wins there. The bottom line just demonstrates the activity we have in place, able to offer a really comprehensive range of funds from equities to fixed income, all the way through to infrastructure over the next few months. All of which will go to our partner funds, including structure, to invest in. Then I look at a bit more practical about the organisation itself. If you look forward to some of the key deliverables for this year, these are all about setting up the company. I'm not going to go through them, but they're very much around setting up the organisation, setting up the infrastructure, having the people in place, having the governance, the oversight, having the regulatory framework in place. So it's all about setting ourselves up to be able to deliver on the ambitions of our partner funds in terms of delivering of that, the cost savings, the transparency factor, and the returns that we can achieve from our investment propositions. Just take you through now just a couple of the wins we've got in the various areas we've had. I'm really pleased where we've got to. It's been a tremendously difficult journey we've had to make because of the new people, new structures, new organisation. But in terms of where we've got to, you just refresh your memories back. It was just in April when we actually launched. If we look back at some of those highlights, we've launched 3 funds already, 14 billion of assets under management, a tremendous achievement so far. Our client relationships have been developed such that we're able to have good communications, good relationships with our partner funds. One of the successes there was particularly around an information day we held, tremendously informative. We had some great feedback from our partner funds, but this was all about the communication we had with our partner funds, able to reassure them that we could select managers properly, we had the right processes, the right governance, and we achieved the right results. Critically important in how we run ourselves is the world of risk and compliance around being an FCA regulated organisation. Very important that we have the proper structures in place. Without being compliant in this regulatory world, we wouldn't be able to do what we do, and we closed down. So very much a focus on risk and compliance. Finance, we have some very complex financial arrangements in order to share costs fairly amongst our partner funds, and we make sure that we are delivering our business as effectively and cost effectively as possible. One really exciting and interesting piece there, which answers a lot of questions, is around how we built an internal administration system for our private equity business, which will be launched shortly. One would normally be looking to outsource that kind of function. In our case, we decided that we would build it in-house. That's good because it's much cheaper. It means we can give benefit, education, training benefit to staff, so as new staff who can learn something new, which is great. And it means that we've got control of the operation and we can deliver things much more efficiently. Our legal team, very strong, to make sure that we're kept on our toes and the legal structures that are in place. It's very important that as we grow, we put the right framework around that, such that if any issues do arise, we're able to refer back to properly documented legal agreements and structures. With the new set of staff coming on board, it's been very important for our personnel and HR departments to make sure that we're operating as if we were expected. We've mixed some people coming in from the private sector, like myself. We've got people who come over from our partner funds, and we've got third-party staff coming in from outside. Very diverse group of staff. We've had to ensure that, one, they're all working as a team, we're all working as a team, and that there's the appropriate education, training, and evaluation of them to make sure that they understand what we're doing, how we operate, and what their role is within the organisation. That aside, we're still reaching out, so we had a graduate fair, which was very exciting, at the NEC last week. Lots of interest in our company from young graduates in the region. That was very, very, very interesting. The operational world, again, trying to make sure we are as efficient as possible. Straight through processing in terms of the operating platforms is a big play, particularly in mind, to make sure we were efficient. And in that context, we've just been running, for example, yesterday we put through 300 million pounds of trades on one day, which will kind of flow through the system very neatly, so it's very effective how we built that, which is very pleasing. This is a note which Michael will carry on later on responsible investments, so I won't steal his thunder here. I'll leave that for him to talk about, but clearly that's a very focus for us, because it's a focus for our client funds. Looking at where we're going to head in the future, a reasonably long list of opportunities for us to offer investments offer investment opportunities for our clients. Some of those are internally managed, some will be externally managed, some will be third-party managed, some in-house managed from ourselves, where we have the expertise. You can see it covers quite a wide range of asset classes. we're talking about equities, fixed income, more complex areas in private equity. Where we'll get best benefit is around some of those more complex asset classes in the alternatives. And to that end, we accelerated the launch of the private equity scheme, which means that we're able to gather those savings for those clients that invest with us much sooner than we might have been anticipating. It's an ambitious plan, but we're working through it very rapidly. But as that plan develops, you can see that the benefit of working with the pool is quite substantial. This is just one example of a passive fund that we have. And it just demonstrates that because we've got a fixed cost base and we're a not-for-profit organisation, you can see that as the assets are moved into us, the cost of those drops rapidly. So we can manage much of the assets internally at a much reduced rate that would be paid to an outside party. So it's important that we do see our business being used, and the benefits are absolutely there and can be delivered through to the fund for its long-term benefit. As we look forward to 2019-20, we'll continue the good work we have been doing, I think, to drive costs down, to provide the benefits to partner funds, and we'll work closely with those partner funds, including Shropshire County Fund, to make sure that we're responding to their requests, delivering the right product that they want, and also ensuring that the central government requirements around the whole benefits of freedom. We do have a wonderful website. Please, if you want to take a look, from Debbie's presentation, there's a lot more people who are very familiar with the world of technology now, so we're up there. If anybody wants to take a look, please do so. We are there. That went live just a few weeks ago, and so please take a look. I'll leave it there. I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? No questions. Okay, well, thank you very much, John.
Thank you very much. So John was very kindly brought up, so we're back on schedule. About 30 minutes to talk with you this afternoon. I'll leave 5 minutes for questions just so we can have this done. I look after responsible investment at LGPS Central. It's our ambition to integrate responsible investment techniques across the asset classes that we manage on behalf of our clients, and that's what I intend to speak with you today about. So I have broadly 3 aims, if you can order the 6 bullet points. 3 aims. One is to talk about what responsible investment is and why we think that is important and what a good thing to do. Secondly, what Shropshire County Pension Fund is doing today. And thirdly, to talk about what LGPS Central does and how it does it. And we should go through that in 30 minutes. So what is responsible investment? This is a quote from our responsible investment and engagement framework. That is disclosed on our website, which John just referred to in his presentation. And we define it as the integration of financial, material, environmental, social, and corporate governance factors into the investment process. We think that if you do that, we're more likely to make a better investment decision, not just for an ethical basis. We distinguish what we do as investment from ethical investment, but also on a returns basis. So historically, there was an approach to investing. Mainly this was done by religious endowments, that kind of faith-based funds, where they would screen out companies whose practices they might agree with. This is different from responsible investment. What we're trying to do is gather financially material information signals about the company. It can be about the governance of the company, so whether it has the right blend of skills on the board, whether it has remuneration structures that are aligned with the shareholder experience and not excessive and set in the context of workforce pay, whether it has a decent approach to diversity and therefore recruits fully into its talent pool, whether the company is aware of its natural resource dependence, and were natural commodities to be properly priced, then it would be less exposed to companies that weren't so aware. These kinds of factors. Getting that information and integrating it into the investment decision. And what I'll do in the third part of my presentation is try to explain that the way we do that differs in different asset classes.
Excuse me, could you speak up a bit?
Sure. Maybe if I just tilt this towards me as well. I'll try to explain that we do that in one way for, say, listed equities, stocks and shares and so forth. A different way for private markets. And also it differs whether we're managing the money internally, so we directly buy stocks and shares or infrastructure assets or whatever it is, versus externally run money.
If it doesn't interrupt you too much, we put it up here. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not usually so tall that this makes a difference.
Is that okay?
Yes, thank you. So I hope that's a sort of introduction to responsible investment. It's often helpful to describe responsible investment in the negatives, what it isn't. What we're not looking to do is something niche, and what we're definitely not looking to do is to do something that detracts from investment returns. We see this as very much supportive of investment returns. And as I explained in my opening pitch, this is something which has evolved. If you go back in time, this was mainly the preserve of ethical endowments, religious endowments. But with regulatory changes, changes to what people describe as fiduciary duty, changes in the statutory guidance for local government pension schemes, then the field has evolved. And if you go to any mainstream fund manager, certainly one running a listed equity strategy, they will have someone like me, a team of people who are taking the information that's important from annual reports, sustainability reports, or it might be reports about certain scandals that have happened, companies collapsing or committing fraud or bribery and corruption or whatever it is, and learning about that and integrating it into the investment process. So this is not something niche or nice to have. We see this as something that's fundamental to our investment process, the way we pick external managers and the way we manage money internally. So this comes out as a relatively small font on this slide, so I apologise for that. The slides are available if you like them. But this is to try and back out what I've been saying about the connection between responsible investment and economic returns. And there were three sources of information. One is from academia. So now we have a long track record of people gathering pieces of information, so on bribery or natural capital dependence or how well governed a company is, and also on returns. And so you can regress one against the other and see if there's a positive or negative correlation. And in fact, there have been so many of these studies that you can now gather all of the studies and make a better study. And the third bullet point here is such a meta-study. It's a little old now, 2015, looked at 200 peer-reviewed papers, and in 88% of the cases, there's a positive and significant correlation between strong ESG performance, so that's environmental, social, and corporate governance performance, and returns. For the remaining 12%, there was either no relationship or a mild negative relationship. Another really interesting paper, at the second bullet point there, a guy called Alex Edmonds. There's also a TED talk on this if you are technology-minded and can get onto YouTube. He looked at workforce engagement, so whether employees were happy and motivated, whether the company invests in developing its human capital, doesn't just treat the workforce as a cost to be minimized. And his study found that companies where employees were engaged and motivated, they had greater returns and also greater positive earnings surprises, so where the company reports earnings that beat the market expectation. And then perhaps more familiar to you guys are the sort of case studies where companies have come across, so things like Ryanair recently with their union disputes, Tesco's with this fraud case, Persimmon with its remuneration, and the CEO has announced his departure last week, Sports Direct, BP with the Gulf of Mexico, etc., etc. So there are case studies to show as much as just in the theoretical case, in the academic case, that managing these kinds of risks, which historically are treated as non-financial, immaterial risks, managing these risks or failure to manage them can lead to a shock or a scandal. So that's part one of why you might want to do something on responsible investment. Part two is stakeholder issues. So more and more people are engaged on this subject. More and more people care about issues like climate change, and more campaign groups are formed, and they lobby pension funds such as Shropshire County, other of our clients, or ourselves directly on issues that they care about. So it's important for us as LGPS Central and for Shropshire County Pension Fund to have a response on this, to have a story to tell. So if it wasn't a good idea from a financial returns perspective, it is a good idea from a stakeholder's disclosure perspective to be able to say what you're doing about these issues. And in terms of climate change, we'll have a couple of examples later. And the third reason why it might be a good idea to do something on responsible investment is a sort of categorical imperative, because the regulators say really that you have to do it. It's a combination of the regulations and the statutory guidance under which local authority pension funds sit. So we're talking about the 2016 regulations, in particular two of them, 72E and 72F. And they talk about, broadly speaking, two things. One is about your integration of E and S and G, environmental, social and corporate governance criteria, into your decision making. Sometimes they're known as non-financial criteria. So how you embed that into your investment process. And the second part is about stewardship. So once you've invested, how do you steward the assets? And primarily that comes to two things. One is engaging with companies. So if you think there is a weakness at a company, then do you go to engage that company, or do you ask someone else to engage on your behalf? Or do you collaborate with other investors if you feel that you maybe are not so large and the company won't take you seriously? Do you collaborate to try and engage with the company to change that kind of practice? So engagement with companies, and also voting. So as equity participants in companies, as people that own stocks and shares, we typically have a voting right at companies. And perhaps historically those voting rights weren't fully exercised or just were left unvoted. But in fact there's much more focus on asset owners, via asset managers in some cases, or via other advisors, exercising their vote and actually saying what they think about a particular remuneration policy, whether it's too high and poorly structured, or re-electing the chair or board or whatever, if you think they've done a good or bad job. So taking those shareholder rights which are available to you and actually exercising them with discretion. So this slide is a bit of a map, and it talks about those regulations, front and centre of what we've built out, and also what Shropshire Pension Fund is doing today. But it also talks about the UK Stewardship Code, that's in the top right-hand side of the slide. And then the Stewardship Code is a set of 7 principles, and in the regulations it says that funds should sign the Stewardship Code, and that's something that the pension fund, Shropshire Pension Fund, is working towards at the moment. Where there are dotted lines, these are not explicit requirements, but just to note that the Law Commission, the pensions regulator, have things to say about these issues. So the pension regulator doesn't govern the investment side of things for LGPS. It has an administrative role, but it does have in its guidance for trustees candidate investment beliefs, steers on what to do about climate change, and its guidance on E and S and G. The thing in the bottom right-hand corner is the UMPRI, so that Shropshire County Pension Fund isn't a signatory to the PRI. In fact, it can't be now. So if we are managing assets on their behalf, it's part of the PRI rules that only LGPS Central can. But we are a signatory, and the way in which responsible investment programs are typically built out it is mindful of the principles of responsible investment. So there are 6 principles. They ask very similar things to the regulations. Be mindful of these criteria in your investment decisions, and be good stewards of the companies and assets that you own. And that's something that we've signed up to, and were you to invest through us, we would be managing money on that basis. And in fact, your existing managers today, the majority of them are also signed up to the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment. Again, this is not something which is meant to detract from financial returns, it's something that is meant to enhance them. So, to summarise, 3 reasons why RI is a good idea. Firstly, good for returns. Secondly, because your stakeholders care. And thirdly, because the regulator says you need to do something. So a little piece, part 2 of the presentation, on what Shropshire County Pension Fund is doing today. So you can find out this information in the investment strategy statement and in the annual report, which contains an annual update. And I would say this because we're in the room and their clients of the Shropshire County Pension Fund are doing much more than a median pension fund in the local government pension scheme. So it has a strategy statement about what it will do, and it has a belief, which is consistent with our belief, that responsible investment can enhance long-term investment performance. And it says that it won't appoint managers that fail the credibility test, that don't do responsible investment themselves. And that's borne out by the managers that they've selected. And I'll come on to the way we integrated that into our recent fund manager search in a minute, with an eye on perhaps Shropshire Pension Fund investing in some of the products and services that we have available. So the fund managers that you have invested in today, most of them are signatories of the Principles of Responsible Investment. All of them are signatories to the UK Stewardship Code, so they explain and report on how they engage with companies, the issues they take seriously, whether it's environmental, social or corporate governance, and the way in which they vote their shares. And in fact, at every quarterly meeting of the Pensions Committee, a responsible investment report is brought to the committee, and that includes, on a vote-by-vote basis, that is the way in which votes have been cast. And there are certain observers of responsible investment practices, one of which is the PLSA, and they have a view on what best practice looks like, and vote-by-vote disclosure on a quarterly basis is their view of best practice. So the work being done at Shropshire County Pension Fund by the existing managers is tending towards the top quartile if you look at the UK pension fund landscape when it comes to responsible investment. Two more important parts of Shropshire's ESG programme today are its LAP membership, so that's the Local Authority Pension Fund Forum. That's a forum that has more than 70 members. All of them are, well, now there are pool members such as LGPS Central, we've signed up, but it's primarily and historically its membership base is local authority pension funds, and collectively it represents more than £200 billion of assets under management, so it has some weight, particularly in the UK, because a lot of local government pension schemes are still invested heavily in UK equities. So if you don't agree with what some particular company is doing, then you can ask the Local Authority Pension Fund Forum to go and engage with that company, and actually collectively it's representing a fair amount of the equity share of the company, so it typically gets a discussion at boardroom level or senior management level, and they disclose a quarterly engagement report on their website so you can see the actual changes that their engagements have made. And then the second part, from a stewardship perspective of Shropshire County Pension Fund's responsible investment programme today, is the responsible engagement overlay, the RIO, that BMO provide. So BMO are primarily an asset manager, but they also have a stewardship service which you can purchase for a fee, and that's what Shropshire County Pension Fund do. And BMO will go and engage companies on your behalf, depending on how large your investment is in that company, and also whether there are material risks in their view, and they will try and engage the company, again at a senior level, typically board, a subject matter expert, or executive management, and try and improve on the weakness that they perceive in the company on a financially material issue. And they engage many companies per year. So most pension funds are diversified across asset classes and also across the market, so you have exposure to all sectors. So yes, it matters. Yes, individual stock performance matters, and if you can engage at the stock level and improve something, and if there's a correlation in valuation or stable earnings in the future, then that's great. But because you're invested across the market, you also care about what happens at the market level as well. So if you can engage with many companies, and through BMO and LAP you do achieve that, then that's good for a diversified UK pension fund. As I said, Shropshire is working towards a stewardship code statement, and we'd be delighted to work with your fund officers on that. And I mentioned your quarterly reporting. This just shows some of the engagements that are happening. This is not a passive activity, this is something that's active and focused. So BMO, this is from the annual report, had more than 1,000 engagements. Some of those engagements, there's more than one engagement per company, because there's more than one risk per company. The Local Authority Pension Fund Forum had about 150, primarily UK, but also some American companies. And then we, in one quarter, so this is the data we have from April till June, the next tranche of data is available soon, we engaged 78 companies on behalf of our clients. An engagement example, this is from BMO, so this is Tesco's, everyone's familiar with Tesco. They've engaged the company for a long time at a senior level, and they're looking at an issue which has ethical connotations, so food waste. Still lots and lots of food is wasted in this country at a time when there's more homelessness, so that often chimes with ethical sensitivities. But there's also a financially material issue, because if Tesco's were able to minimise their food waste, they would reduce their costs. And if they could use the food waste as a positive, as they have ended up doing by using waste-to-energy programs, then actually you can turn it into an opportunity, not just reducing a risk. So this is a small case study from BMO, where they've identified an issue, raised it with Tesco's, and then achieved some sort of outcome. But I think what's another thing that's interesting here, observation that I would make, is that E and S&G criteria, or E and S&G observations that you might make about a company, they tell you immediately about the thing you've observed, so in this case food waste being too high or not quantified or whatever, but also the company's response to it and the way they respond to your engagement with the company can tell you something about the quality of the management of the company and something about the transparency of the board. So when it comes to another kind of issue, there might be maybe the company is doing a rights issue, or maybe the company is looking to acquire another company or doing some sort of large merger or acquisition, and they come to shareholders and you might have a concern. If you have a 2 or 3 year track record of engaging with the company, and they've been very open and welcoming to your engagement, that might give you confidence that what they're doing when it comes to a big capital decision is prudent and has been well governed. If you have had 3 years of being fobbed off, then you may take a more pessimistic view that might affect the way you exercise your vote when it comes to a large capital decision. I want to spend just the next 10 minutes or so talking about what OGBS Central does. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll be convinced that we have a credible responsible investment strategy, and that it's one that would implement your own programme for you that is consistent and aligned with Shropshire's programme. So we have a framework, it's on our website. We approved it in April, so before we managed a single pound of money in our structures, we had to have a responsible investment. And we built that in a way in union with our partner funds. So the first thing we did was we looked at the investment beliefs of all of our partner funds, gathered them and synthesized them, and set basically an aggregation, some responsible investment beliefs for OGBS Central, but they're very much founded on our partner funds investment beliefs. So there's a quote in the slide, in 2 slides before, with Shropshire's investment beliefs, saying that responsible investment can be linked to investment returns over the long term. So that's something we've incorporated. Most of our clients say that diversification is a key risk management tool, so that's something we've incorporated. And that also leads to another of our beliefs, which is that engagement is preferred to divestment. If you think that diversification is a useful risk management tool, then to the extent that you divest from entire sectors of the economy, you're limiting your ability to diversify and therefore to manage risk. So we prefer to engage with companies to improve them rather than divest, and we think that's consistent with the investment beliefs that our partner funds have. There are more investment beliefs beside that, but I won't labour the point. And we built also upon clients' frameworks, so some partner funds have specific responsible investment frameworks. One has a statement on climate change, a couple have signed the stewardship code. Fortunately for my workload, these things were aligned with one another, that there weren't major inconsistencies, and we were able to deliver a framework which met the expectations of all of our clients. And this is something which we developed and evolved and improved, working with something called the PAF, the Practitioners Advisory Forum, which will be one of the boxes on John's organogram of LGPS Central, and in particular the Responsible Investment Working Group of the PAF, which reports into the PAF and in turn to your chair. So these are our responsible investment leads. There are 7 of them, as I said. The RI's report supportive of risk-adjusted returns. We think that corporate governance is very important. We also think that cognitive diversity is very important. One of our stewardship themes for this year is diversity. So we've engaged recently with companies on greater female representation, greater ethnic representation at boards, at senior management level, and at the workforce more generally. We also think that fees and remuneration are really important. So in recent years, board pay, in our view, has gone out of hand, needs to come down, needs to be more aligned with the shareholder experience, needs to be structured so that it doesn't incentivize excessive risk-taking. And that's true for the management of companies that we invest in. It's also true for investment management fees as well. So John referred to the transparency code, the SAB transparency code, which we have signed up to. We expect to negotiate on your behalf for lower fees to save on management costs, and John provided some statistics of the expected cost savings that we could achieve. We also expect fund managers to be completely transparent so that the actual cost savings that we're reporting to you do reflect what is actually being saved. Historically, there have been some hidden costs. And that goes as much for them as it does for us. We will be entirely transparent according to the transparency code with our clients and partner funds. Finally, I just want to mention one particular investment belief which we articulated on climate change. And not many asset managers say something specific here. Most are a little vague. But we think that it's clear that climate change represents a financially material threat to companies, not just in the energy sector, but also more broadly. So we have come out and said that we think that climate change is financially material and that it should be managed by responsible investors using effective stewardship techniques. From those beliefs, which are built on our partner funds, we've set 2 objectives. Very simple. One is to support the investment objectives, and secondly, to be an exemplar. So not every pension fund would claim to be a responsible investor, and far fewer are responsible investors. As I mentioned, Shropshire, by having its programme, is top quartile in the UK context. But the more we can set a standard in the marketplace, the greater we think for ourselves, because the greater the pressure on companies and the providers of this kind of information as well. So there will be a slide a little later on the various initiatives that we're a part of, and we don't just sign up to those to get the badge. In many cases, I or a colleague will be on the advisory group or the steering committee, or will go along to meetings and take an active participation in these groups. We want to be genuine industry participants, and we want to have an active and influential voice on things that matter to us and to our partner funds. At first glance, this slide looks a little complex, but I just want to draw your attention to 3 of the boxes here. One is on the top left called selection, one is on the top right called stewardship, and a third is at the bottom called transparency and disclosure. They are the 3 pillars of our framework. So we intend to integrate responsible investment in our selection of assets. So we've recently announced that we've appointed 3 external fund managers to manage our global equity strategy. Assessing and rating their responsible investment programme was a key part of that search. And it will be for other managers that we appoint, and it's also a key part of the way we manage money internally too. So that's our selection of assets that we do before we commit money to something. And stewardship is the bit we do afterwards, so we don't just invest and forget about it. We engage with many companies. We also have an organisation to help us with this called Hermes EOS. We engage about 500 companies a year. And then we vote our shares based on a policy which again was developed in union with our partner funds and which will be reviewed every March. So we have a stewardship program as well. Finally, on transparency and disclosure, the third pillar, there's no point in doing all these things without communicating to our key stakeholders what we're doing. So every quarter we issue a quarterly stewardship report. Please go and see it, it's on our website. We also disclose every single vote that we have voted on our clients' behalf. That's also on our website. And where more material changes come up, we will also disclose that too. and we're happy to work with our partner funds to answer queries that their stakeholders might have as well. So 3 pillars: selection, stewardship, transparency, disclosure. So what we do before we buy an asset to make sure it's fit for purpose, what we do after we bought an asset to steward it responsibly, and finally transparency and disclosing to our key stakeholders. Here's the partnership slide I mentioned. It looks like that we've just been to Cub Scouts and got all the badges that they offered, but in fact we've been quite judicious with this. So a bunch of these refer specifically to climate change. So the top right-hand portion, the 6 logos in the top right-hand corner, so Climate Action 100 Plus, that's an initiative where many investors, worth $30 trillion of assets under management. If you think LGPS Central is quite large, being 45 billion sterling, this is $30 trillion of assets under management, where investors coming together to target the 150 most impactful companies in the world, listed equity companies, so companies that list their shares on public markets, and to ask them to do 3 things. One is to have good governance of climate change risk. Secondly is to have a business model that aligns with the Paris Agreement. And thirdly is to disclose appropriately on climate risk, because disclosure is quite poor at the moment. So that's direct engagement with companies, and I am one of the co-leads on 2 UK engagements that was part of that programme. So we're not just signing the badge, we actually are in the room with the boards and management of these companies. I'd like to highlight also the Transition Pathway Initiative, which is immediately above that one. That is a free-to-use tool, so again, if you do surf the web, log onto the TPI, it's a free-to-use tool which assesses the climate readiness of impactful companies in the most impactful sectors. It borrows the insights and academic credibility of the London School of Economics. They have a particular climate change programme, it borrows that. And it uses data from FTSE Russell, the index provider, and it provides very simple metrics. We use it, I'm on the steering committee and the technical group, but we actually use it in our voting decisions. So where companies are rating very poorly on these metrics, we actually voted against the chair of that company in the proxy season last year, because we feel that those companies, in particular the chair who takes responsibility for the strategy of the company, weren't sufficiently addressing climate risks. I'd like to just mention one more of these logos before we move on, which is the 30% Club, which is one way in which we are implementing our stewardship theme of diversity. So this the 30% Club has many offshoots, and one of them is the investor group, which we're a part of, and we go and engage with companies where there's fewer than 30% of the board is female, and we ask those companies to make plans to address that over the long term. We're not looking for them to box tick and just appoint people in their contact book to make up a quota. We're looking to understand from the company whether they appreciate what cognitive diversity on their board can actually bring to them, and how it can make a difference to discussions and decisions that are made at the board level, but also how they can filter through to the cultural level. And the group has achieved a lot of success. And in fact, the FTSE 100 became greater than 30% female for the first time last month. And it's through pressure groups like this where we can achieve that kind of change. It's not just asset owners and pension funds, we team up with large asset managers as well. Again, collectively we have far more influence over companies than were we to just act alone. So some examples of what LGPS Central has done since April, since we started managing money in April, but yes, we published the framework. And there are many more examples in our quarterly stewardship report, which I encourage you to read. Some of the work we've done is at the 30% Club. So last week, for example, I met a UK listed energy company, and they had no women on their board. They now have a female chair, and they've set a target to get to 30% in 2 years. So that was a relatively overnight success, but it's just symptomatic of the kinds of change that you can make, rather than just making statements and something's a good idea, actually delivering on meaningful change at companies. We've partnered with Climate Action 100 Plus, as I mentioned, and we have had very good results with global energy companies, so companies that provide primary energy, typically fossil fuels, but also those that are transitioning towards renewable energy. And those companies have stated their willingness to us to make a business model which aligns over the long term with the Paris Agreement. And finally, we had a process to select fund managers. We had lots and lots of fund managers applying for this, for our global equity mandate. And we finally landed on 3 highly respected fund managers. And responsible investment was a key part of this process at all stages. So we designed a pre-qualification questionnaire. Responsible investment had a high rating in that questionnaire. We designed an RFP. Responsible investment was present again at the manager clarification meetings. We're asking detailed questions about their commitment to responsible investment. Again, because we think it's returns enhancing, not because we think it's a nice thing to do. Finally, should you wish to do so, you can monitor our progress in a number of ways. So there are 3 examples here. One's the quarterly stewardship report. 2 is our voting decisions on a vote-by-vote basis rather than aggregating, so you can see how we voted at every company that we're invested in. And thirdly, on the bottom right-hand side, is our climate change disclosure. So this is an image which is taken from a report issued by Michael Bloomberg, the data mogul, sponsored by Governor Mark Carney in his role as the chair of the Financial Stability Board, and they've set a best practice standard for how to disclose on climate change. And we intend to adopt that standard and report publicly on how we're managing the risk and grabbing any opportunities that are available. So if I were to summarise, I would just say that responsible investment is aligned with future duty. We think it's a returns enhancing rather than a compromise on returns. And if I could say one more thing, it would be that working in collaboration and being clear with the communication is key when it comes to doing something on responsible investment. So 1 minute overdue, but I'm happy to take questions, Councillor Wiggins.
Yep. First question now.
Yeah, just a question on the security. And does it understand on the question of public companies with shareholders, how easy is it with private equity organisations to engage? And how effective is it?
That's an excellent question. So for the benefit of the room, the question is, engaging with listed companies is one thing where you have shareholder rights, but how can you actually influence private companies? It's a really good question, and it's something which historically perhaps has been not addressed or insufficiently addressed, but we've worked with the Principles for Responsible Investment to set us a set of disclosure guidelines for private equity funds. So most UK pension funds would be invested in private equity funds rather than specific private companies. And this sets a best practice template for how those funds can disclose to us, because historically they've said very little about this. You get your returns quarterly and annually, and that's pretty much it. And so this is asking them to disclose on diversity metrics, climate change metrics, what their process is for integrating responsible investment, and to do it publicly too. So we've collaborated with other investors to set this standard and put it into the marketplace, and hopefully more and more private equity fund managers will sign up to this and disclose on that. We do co-invest in some private companies, so that's not where we've invested in, say, a fund of 10 to 12 constituents, but where we've actually invested in one particular asset. And what you tend to get there is the offer of a board seat or of an observation there, and you get voting rights too. So it's similar to a listed company. However, you don't tend to get the same level of protections that are there. That's not to say that you can't do with the company. You can have meaningful conversations, but this goes back to why it's so important to do your due diligence and your selection properly. You need to understand before you buy the asset whether people running that asset, or whether your co-investors, the rest of the shareholder base, or the majority investor, or the state in some cases, because some of these are mainly state-owned, whether they are likely to be communicative with you, take on board your view, or whether they have robust governance structures in place. So there are some similarities, some differences. I don't think we've completely cracked it, but we are trying to work with our peers in the industry to set high standards, not just for listed companies, but for private ones as well.
Are there any more questions? No? Well, in that case, I'd just like to thank Michael for the work that you did.